Assume that the government increases spending on national defense without raising taxes. On your in your graph, in part A, show how the government action affects aggregate demand. Part 2, how will this government action affect the unemployment rate in the short run? Explain. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Assume that the government increases spending on national defense without raising taxes. Well, remember, one of the factors that changes, or the factor that changes aggregate demand is everything that creates real GDP. Remember what real GDP is. It's C plus I plus G plus NX. Okay? Consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Well, if that's the case, if the government is increasing its spending while not doing anything to taxes, because remember, taxes can have an effect on GDP, real GDP. This is a fiscal policy. Well, they're trying to get you to understand that there is no negative consequence, at least in this case, to increasing government spending because they're not raising taxes in order to do it. This increase in spending, in this case, is actually going to have a positive effect on aggregate demand. So if this goes up in C plus I plus G plus NX, what we should see is a shift in the aggregate demand curve. So what kind of shift do you think that's going to be? Is that going to be a shift to the right, a shift to the left, or is it going to stay the same? In this case, if you said a shift to the right, you would be absolutely correct. So let's label that aggregate demand 2 so that we know that this is the change. Okay, let's take a look. All right, we have our aggregate demand change. What's going to happen? Now remember, you got to be clear about what they're asking for in this part. Letter B, assume that the government increases spending on national defense without raising taxes. Well, we showed on part A how the government action affects aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. What we have to do now is talk about how this government action affects the unemployment rate in the short run. So for this case, let's see what we're going to find in the short run. We're going to find that we're moving from this point to this point. Remember, this is short run aggregate supply. So if this is employment or output, isn't it true that there's going to be a decrease in unemployment? We're going to find that there's more output because of the aggregate demand in the economy, which is going to result in lower unemployment rates in the short run. In the long run, we could take a look at this graph. What we're going to find is that in the long run, remember, at the long run aggregate supply curve at this intersection point, we're not going to be changing full employment because in the long run we can't. Okay, in the long run, we have maximized our all the resources to the best use, or our PPC that we talked about before. So we're not going to find any employment changing, or at least output changing at this employment level. All we're going to do is see an increase in the price levels at that point. Okay, so this would be PLE2 to show that. So again, I think we've done pretty much what we've needed to do for Part A and Part B. We've shown how government action affects aggregate demand. We've also discussed how this government action will affect the unemployment rate in the short run. And the reason why it's going to affect the unemployment rate, again, has to do with this increase in consumption, or this increase in output of real GDP is going to diminish the unemployment rate. Okay. So let's get back to the question. Remember, I said earlier we could do Part A, Part B, and Part C. So we've done 2 out of the 3 parts. Let's take a look at Part C. Assume that the economy adjusts to a new long-run equilibrium after the increase in government spending. How will the short-run aggregate supply curve in the new long-run equilibrium compare with that in the initial long-run equilibrium in Part A? Explain. On your graph in Part A, label the new long-run equilibrium price level as PL2. Well, let's take a look at this. What did we arrive at? Assume that it adjusts to a new long-run equilibrium. So in the short run, remember, In the short run, we increased employment to here. In the long run, what we have done is created a situation where we have raised our prices on the long run aggregate supply curve, our overall price levels to PLE2, but we've remained at the same level of full employment. So how will the short run aggregate supply curve in the new long run equilibrium compare with that in the initial long run equilibrium in part A? Well, in the short run, it's going to have to adjust in the short run to get to this point, isn't it? So what we're going to do is show the short run aggregate supply making adjustments to get back to an equilibrium point, which actually happens to be here. That's a little off. Maybe we should get rid of that. Let's undo that. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's get it back. Let's go back one. There we go. All right. So basically what we're trying to do here is show a shift in the long run aggregate supply that's going to get us to a point where we're back here at equilibrium again. So again, this is short run maneuvering, and the long run constantly stays the same. Okay, this is the long run place. So if we make our changes, again, we have to label everything appropriately. Short run aggregate supply 2, and show the changes here. What's going to happen? We're going to be at full employment again. Our output stays at this point, YE, and we're going to show an increase in the overall price levels at this long run equilibrium of PLE2. Did we answer the question? Let's see. Do we have to explain this? Well, what's going to happen? How will the short run aggregate supply curve compare with that in the initial long run equilibrium in part A? Well, it's going to be a shift decrease in the aggregate supply because of the changes that take place in the overall economy. There's going to be upward pressure on prices to move the overall price level up to this point, because we have to get back to this long run equilibrium. All right, I think we did what we had to do here. Letter A, B, and C, we've answered them all. So let's take a look at another question. See how you do with it. Again, you can just pause it if you'd like. And let me expand it a little bit. This is a very similar question. This actually comes from the 2006 macroeconomics exam. It's number 1, the long free response question. And you should be able to do part 1A, B, and C. Probably not going to be able to do D and E on this one, but you should, without a doubt, be able to do A, B, and C. See what you come up with for this, and come back to class with your answers so we can go over it together and see how you did. We're going to add to this in class next time and try to figure out how to play around with some more real applications of this based on the AP exam. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed another installment of the flip lesson by me, G, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Thanks for listening.